It was a dark and quiet night. You know, the kind of night where everything feels a little too still, and the silence starts to feel almost heavy. Have you ever felt that? The kind of silence that wraps around you like a blanket, making your skin tingle with unease. That's the kind of night it was when everything began. Sarah had just finished her shift at the diner. The neon lights flickered as she stepped outside, locking the door behind her. It was late, almost midnight, and she was looking forward to a long, peaceful night of sleep. But as she walked to her car, something caught her eye. A strange light in the sky. It wasn't a star, and it wasn't a plane. It flickered and moved in ways that didn't make sense. At first, she thought it was just her eyes playing tricks on her, maybe from exhaustion. But the light grew brighter, drawing her in. And then it happened. An odd, low hum filled the air, vibrating through her chest. Have you ever heard a sound that you couldn't explain? Something that made your heart race for no reason? This was one of those sounds. Curiosity got the best of her. Against her better judgment, Sarah walked closer to where the light was coming from. It was coming from the woods on the edge of town. Normally, Sarah wouldn't have dared to go anywhere near those woods after dark. Everyone knew they were strange. People said they were haunted, that the trees whispered at night. But this wasn't normal. She could feel it deep in her bones. As Sarah ventured further into the woods, the light seemed to grow stronger, and the hum grew louder. It was like something was calling her. Did you ever feel like something was pulling you toward something you didn't want to go? That's exactly how she felt. Every step felt like it was leading her further into something unnatural. The trees in the forest seemed to stretch unnaturally high, their branches twisting in weird, tangled patterns. She could hear rustling in the leaves, but no animals. It was as if everything around her was holding its breath. She finally reached a clearing. In the center, there was something she couldn't explain. A massive object, glowing and pulsating, like a giant star fallen to Earth. Its surface shimmered, and Sarah could feel the heat radiating off it, though it wasn't hot like fire. It was like the warmth of the sun on a summer day, but this was coming from something wrong. Suddenly, a figure appeared beside the object. It wasn't human. Not at all. The shape was strange, like it had been formed by light and shadows. It stood there, watching her with eyes that gleamed like black holes. Empty, and yet full of something that made her want to run, but she couldn't move. Her legs felt frozen in place. The figure didn't speak at first. It just stared at her, as if it was studying her, deciding what to do next. Sarah's mind raced. Was this some kind of alien? Or maybe a ghost? She couldn't explain it, but everything about this felt wrong, like she was stepping into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Have you ever felt trapped in a moment, unable to move or think clearly? That's exactly how Sarah felt. Her breath caught in her throat, and all she could do was stare back at the strange figure. She couldn't even scream. The figure finally moved, but not in a way that made any sense. It twisted and stretched, bending in ways that made Sarah's stomach churn. It wasn't like a human movement at all. It was as if it was shifting through space, and every movement was wrong. The figure lifted a hand toward her, and that's when she saw it. Its fingers weren't fingers at all. They were long, translucent tendrils like spider webs reaching for her. And then, in a voice that wasn't a voice at all, more like a thought in her head, it spoke. "Why are you here, human?" The words were strange, but Sarah understood them clearly. She couldn't answer. The words stuck in her throat like they had been glued there. All she could do was watch as the creature, this thing that wasn't from this world, watched her back. "Curious, aren't you?" the creature said. "You shouldn't be." What did it mean by that? Was it warning her, or was it taunting her? Sarah's mind spun with 1,000 questions, but none of them made any sense. It was as if she wasn't meant to understand what was happening. It was too big, too impossible to process. And then, without warning, the creature reached out, and its tendrils touched Sarah's skin. It was cold, ice cold, and yet there was a strange, tingling sensation that followed the touch. The world around her seemed to blur and distort, like reality itself was stretching, bending. The trees around her warped and swirled in patterns she couldn't understand. Was she dreaming? Was this even real? Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shifted, and she stumbled forward, falling into darkness. Her world went black, and the last thing she heard was the hum of that strange light, louder now, as if it was swallowing everything around her. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was no longer in the woods. She was in a room? Or was it even a room? The walls were curved, like the inside of a giant sphere, glowing with an eerie light. There were no windows, no doors, just endless walls of strange symbols she couldn't understand. She was alone, but she didn't feel alone. The air around her seemed thick with something invisible, and her skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even though you knew no one was there? That's how Sarah felt. She wasn't alone. Something or someone was with her. But when she looked around, there was nothing. The creature appeared again, but this time, it wasn't just standing. It was floating, its tendrils swaying in the air like they were alive. And its eyes, those black, empty eyes, seemed to pierce right through her soul. "You are out of time, human," the creature said, its voice like a cold whisper inside her mind. "You have crossed into a world that does not belong to you. You are no longer part of your reality. You will never return." Panic surged through Sarah. Was this it? Was she trapped in some alien dimension forever? What had happened to her life, her town, everything she knew? The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she understood. It was like her entire existence was nothing more than a dream, and the dream was ending. The creature circled around her, its tendrils reaching toward her again. "You will forget," it said. "You will forget everything. Your mind will erase it all, and you will return, but you will never be the same." As the creature's tendrils touched her again, the world around Sarah began to spin. Her vision blurred, and everything seemed to dissolve into light. She couldn't hold on to anything, couldn't stop herself from being pulled into the unknown. And then, just like that, she was back. Sarah stood in the clearing, the strange glowing object now gone, as if it had never been there at all. The woods were silent again, and the air felt normal. Her heart raced in her chest as she tried to piece together what had just happened. Was it a dream? A hallucination? But the fear still clung to her, thick and suffocating. She ran back to her car and drove home. But even as she pulled into her driveway, she felt different. She felt as if something had shifted in the very core of her being. Was she truly the same person who had walked into those woods? What if the creature was right? What if everything had changed and she hadn't even noticed? As Sarah lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer alone. The darkness around her seemed to pulse with something watching, waiting. What happened to S? Sarah that night? Was it a warning, a dream, or something far worse? Maybe we'll never know. But be careful when you hear that hum in the distance. Don't follow it. Trust me, you don't want to know what's out there. If you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Who knows what strange things are out there, just waiting to be uncovered.